None of you will ever know, will ever come to realize the truth that's been hidden from you. I am here to set that truth free. For years, thousands of years, you have all been kept in the dark. The galaxy, the Jedi, the Sith, and all of you in the dark, in the shadow. But now I will tell of a story that has been locked away. You've all been deceived. I remember the age well. It was a terrible time, a dark time. There was a dark power that spread fast throughout the entire galaxy, manufactured by one man, the first of his kind. There were very few Force wielders of that age. I was among those very few. The darkness engulfed everything in its path. Star systems were defenseless to this newfound power and ambition. Old forces, governments, and everything in its path succumbed. He was the first Dark Lord of the Galactic Age, and he had a plan. And so did we. We can't win this. We only have one Force wielder and a fleet of 6 ships, and they... A calm hand touched his shoulder. You must learn to be more optimistic, Bastion. Bastion looked past his pilot's control console and outward through the window at the brilliant, glowing lights of hyperspace. Optimistic, he repeated. I wish I were as calm as you right now, Clay. Perhaps you can teach me how to be a Force wielder like yourself. Clay adjusted her light cortosis battle armor, which she painted a crystal blue, then draped a white cloak over it. She then tapped a button on her wrist, which shot a protective battle mask over her face, covering her short white hair and blue eyes. Find balance in the importance of the mission, she said, and focus. You think this will stop him? He asked. 6 seconds until destination, the co-pilot shouted next to them. Clay remained silent. Let's hope this works, Bastion said uneasily. Here we go. Bastion pulled hard on a lever next to him, and the shuttle shot out of hyperspace with a bang, positioning them right above a giant black and gray ship. The ship had a menacing appearance. It was sleekly rounded at the bow, but jaggedly designed near the aft, right at the engines, which were glowing a brilliant blue. The massive shuttle was surrounded by 12 smaller, pointed frigates, bristling with turrets. Optimistic, Bastion repeated in disbelief. The 5 other Allied ships shot out of hyperspace around theirs. Clay nodded at Bastion, and he opened a communications channel. Everyone, you know the drill. We capture the target alive. Support us to allow Clay and the assault teams get in and out. Good luck. Warning lights pinged a dark red, giving the cockpit an eerie glow, and alarms started to blare. We can hold out for 15 minutes at best, Bastion shouted after Clay, who was already running to the hangar. Targeting solutions, his co-pilot shouted, noticing that small gleaming fighters poured out of the hangar, out of the massive enemy craft in the distance. Another warning light went off, as the large shuttle and its supporting frigates targeted their small fleet. Maybe less than 15 minutes, Bastion whispered nervously. Clay sprinted through the winding halls of the craft and stormed through the hangar bay, leaping over stairwells and jumped through the closing door of her transport vessel. She grasped hard onto the body of the stabilizer handles hanging from the ceiling, as there was no room left to sit within the transport. Punch it, she shouted to the pilot. The engines roared on, and the transport kicked violently as the thrusters pushed everything they had. The hangar bay doors began to open as all the transport streamed towards the massive expanse of space that was now revealing itself. Clay heard voices in the comm channel being broadcasted within the shuttle. Watch your left, watch your left. Fighters! Keep an eye out on those frigates. The voices echoed. Their transport breached the confines of the hangar bay and shot out into space. A distant red and orange cloud, surrounded by dozens of stars, erupted into her vision from the pilot's cockpit down the hall. The transport took a hard turn away from the peaceful scene towards a one of anarchy. A dozen of their block-shaped heavy fighters screeched past onto the scene ahead. Hundreds of explosions lit up the surround, while hundreds of sleek and dark enemy fighters glistened in the distance as they tore apart their fighter support. The 12 enemy frigates now pointed aggressively towards their allied corvette-class starships, protecting the massive, menacing capital ship, while bursts of high-energy pulses and lasers shot out from the frigate's massive cannons, attempting to keep the corvettes at bay. "We won't last long against this," Bastion said over the Clay's private channel. Clay remained calm. She was interrupted while her transport was struck by a direct hit from a passing enemy fighter, being chased close in tail by one of theirs. "We have to make this count. There's no other option," she finished. "Corvettes, keep the frigates occupied," the voice of the Admiral clicked onto the public comm. "And fighters, make sure our transports make it to their target. They must get aboard that capital ship. Buy them all the time they need." The transmission was interrupted, and there was a bright fiery flash of red and orange as an explosion erupted off into the distance. One of the frigates managed to strike the Admiral's corvette. Clay looked around the transport and saw dozens of soldiers, all of them ready, knowing how high the stakes were, and it appeared as though they didn't fear death. Their rifles and sabers were at the ready. Clay couldn't be prouder to be surrounded by such men and women. "Pilot," she shouted, "piggyback behind a fighter. You can leapfrog your way to the closest hangar on the capital ship." A loud explosion rattled the transport as a sister craft next to them was hit directly by a round from the capital ship's defensive turrets. Bastion looked nervously at the digital screen on his control panel, which displayed the battlefield statistics. His fellow comrades were falling at an astounding rate. Already, they had lost one corvette, 2 were heavily damaged, and 15% of their fighter force was destroyed. And they weren't even 5 minutes into the battle. He then shifted his nervous gaze off into the distance at Clay's transport, which was already in the thick of fire. Swarms of enemy attack craft descended upon their fighters in the distance. Explosions echoed from afar. "Come on, Clay," he whispered. "Come on." Suddenly, he saw a stray, damaged enemy fighter break formation, fire streaming from one of its silver-tipped angular wings. It banked hard and sailed straight for Clay's fighter. Bastion stood up. One of their own fighters intercepted, but it was too late. The sleek enemy vessel struck the side of Clay's transport. Sparks and a small explosion of vibrant color streamed into space. Clay hit the floor hard as a strong force rocked the foundations of the transport. Steam and sparks shot up in all directions. She pushed up from the floor and powered her way to the cockpit. The pilot was knocked out of commission, and so was the co-pilot, who elected not to wear head protection, and whose skull was cracked into the side of the window. Clay carefully set the pilot aside and sat at the control station. Warning sounds and shouts from the passengers filled her ears, while bright explosions and a massive capital ship filled her vision. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt a soothing force wash upon her body, guiding her mind and her fingers as they swept over the control console. She gently grabbed hold of the control stick and took the ship into an immediate dive, weaving in and out of danger. She tucked and rolled the transport through the intense battlefield. Further and further the transport flew, avoiding missiles, fighters, and explosions until Clay felt a new presence. A dark presence. Her eyes shot open, and she banked the ship upwards into the capital ship's open hangar bay doors. The ship landed with a rough crash as she nearly avoided a collision with an exiting fighter and spun uncontrollably into a wall where it had come to a harsh rest. "She's here," Clay whispered to herself, looking at her hands shaking from the cold feeling that now surrounded her. Clay looked over to the group of soldiers which were now looking silently in disbelief at her new achievement, as sparks shot out from the ceiling above. Clay steadied her hands and made a fist. "Let's move," she shouted, and punched the emergency hatch release button on the ship's controls, which shot the transport's bay door open. All the soldiers immediately started to scramble to attention and hurry out of the transport. "We're having trouble holding the line," Clay overheard someone shout on the public comm. "Bastion? Are we the only ones that made it in?" she asked. "Yes, but a few others are close. We lost many," he said. "Hurry, Clay." The soldiers began to run out, all fully geared up, head to toe in protective combat armor, and had guns at the ready. Clay lined up behind the soldiers and attempted to feel the ship around her, in a quick state of meditation. A loud crack immediately interrupted her, and she opened her eyes to the first soldier who stepped out and saw a white plasma laser crash right into the private's helmet. The private immediately fell to the ground. 3 more unlucky soldiers were caught out in the open too, and attempted to return fire, but were immediately cut down by a hail of laser rounds. The captain of the group turned to Clay. "This is not a good position. The exit is too far, and there are other enemy soldiers already surrounding us." The captain of the group turned to Clay. "This is not a good position. The exit is too far, and there are enemy soldiers already surrounding us." Clay searched the large landing bay with her mind, and also felt something coming. She knew the transport landed towards the end of the hangar, near the exit, but it wasn't close enough. Their ship provided cover for some of their route there, but the trick was getting out. Exiting the transport left them all right in the center of a wide-open field. "Get your troops ready to sprint to the exit doors," she said. "I'll cover you." Clay ran briskly to the door, tucked and rolled out. She held her left hand up and palm open, deflecting the oncoming fire from the black-armored enemy troops on the other side of the hangar. She then took her right hand and reached out with the force, towards a storage container near the enemy soldiers, and pulled. The large metallic container teetered and slowly fell to the ground, top bursting off as it did so. Dozens of small silver and red orbs rolled out onto the floor. "Go," she shouted to the captain. 2 transports streamed into the hangar. One was heavily damaged, spewing fire from its hull and engines, while the other remained decently intact. Clay pulled hard with the force, focusing on the orbs. All flicked yellow and began to hum. More laser fire screeched her way, but she kept it at bay with the force, while her companions returned fire as they ran behind the transport for cover. She then scattered the orbs all around the enemy troops and their remaining aircraft that were gathered on the other side of the hangar bay. The first transport came to a halt near Clay successfully in midair and opened its doors, while the other crashed violently into the floor between them and the enemy troops, detonating in a heap of explosive fire. Clay then released the orbs from her control, and a dozen more detonations went off, engulfing the enemy and causing mass panic. "That's our cue," the captain shouted, while they all ran for the door and platform. Around 20 reinforcements from the surviving transport also jumped gracefully to the ground, joining up with them, while laying down suppressive fire in the direction of the already preoccupied enemy force. Clay released her force protection from the enemy fire and ran quickly to meet up with the remainder of the strike force, which was strategically lined up against the wall near the sealed hangar bay door, which led them to the main hall. One of the soldiers hacked into the door's control panel with stunning speed, and it shot open. "You studied the blueprints?" the captain shouted to her over the continuing explosions and fire of blasters. "How far do we have?" The last of the soldiers ducked into the door, leaving Clay and the captain alone, while the other damaged transport made it into the landing bay, distracting the remaining enemy troops. The last of the enemy soldiers ducked into the door, leaving Clay and the captain alone, while another damaged transport made it into the landing bay, distracting the remaining enemy troops. Clay turned towards the captain. 5 minutes if we take the emergency shafts. That's the fastest route." They both ducked into the hall, and the soldier sealed the door. "I'm leaving a small team of 10 here with me. We're going to keep the escape route open," the captain said. Clay took the remaining members of her team as they ran through the large, dark hallways of the capital ship and towards the emergency ventilation shafts near the engine room. Those shafts ran throughout the entire center of the capital ship like a spine, and the center is exactly where she needed to go. She quickly homed into her force powers and removed a large vent from the shaft, creating an entrance. She felt a close movement approaching in the force. A blaster rifle echoed in the distance, while Clay gracefully dodged a fast white laser beam with a small movement of her spine, and it crashed into a pipe next to her, spewing a cloud of hot steam. The soldiers next to her raised their rifles and returned fire, suppressing the fast-approaching, dark, armor-clad troops. "Go, Lady Clay," a soldier said. "We will cover you. There isn't much time." More soldiers' footsteps echoed down the hall as rifles began to fire, on both sides, illuminating the dim hall in red and white colors. Clay ran into the ventilation shaft, and 3 other soldiers followed her, equipped with close-quarters ballista pistols. 2 carried lightsabers on their belts, and 1 had a sheathed vibroblade. Their dark gray uniforms were charred from blaster fire and explosions, and their silver protective blaster armor looked worn, but they were ready. "It's not far from here," she said, pausing after she heard a muffled explosion from the room they just came from. "I'll lead point." Clay pushed stealthily onward through the ventilation system until they were right above the hallway they had to be. A dark, cold feeling started to blanket over her senses, and a distant, dark, unintelligible whisper echoed in her mind. She was here. She shook off the feeling and opened her palm. Clay's gold and silver lightsaber handle flew into her armor-plated hand, and she grabbed tightly. She released her glowing gold lightsaber, and a deep hum of the blade resounded throughout these small confines of the ventilation shaft, and its color reflected off the dark walls, illuminating the space around them. The 2 other soldiers did the same, unsheathing their yellow lightsabers, and the 3rd got her vibroblade at the ready. Clay flipped the handle of her blade over, pushing through the metal surface beneath her, cutting a large circle around the circumference of her body. The surface beneath her gave way, and she crashed to the ground, right in the middle of 5 armored guards, all dressed head to toe in black and silver battle armor and protective masked helmet. The surface beneath her gave way, and she crashed to the ground, right in the middle of 5 armed guards, all dressed head to toe in black and silver battle armor and a protective masked helmet, while guarding a large silver mechanical door. Before the soldiers could even raise their rifles, Clay reacted with lightning speed. She stretched her arms out to the 2 guards in front of her and let the force flow through her body. The 2 armed soldiers lifted off the ground, and Clay threw her arms together, crashing the guards into one another, with a force so strong it dented their heavy-plated armor like it was cardboard. They then fell to the floor with a loud clank. Another pair of guards raised their rifles at Clay and fired. She nearly dodged one round which scorched her white cloak. Gracefully waving her golden lightsaber, she deflected another laser right into the shooter's breastplate, and effortlessly turned her wrists to deflect a second white laser beam into the other guard. Both crumbled to the floor simultaneously. Clay, without looking, raised her lightsaber behind her back to another sound of a blaster rifle discharging. The round ricocheted off her saber and into the face mask of a guard, taking cover from behind a curved hallway pedestal. The hole in his broken dark face mask hissed as smoke poured out, while his body slowly slumped against the wall. Her 3 companions jumped to the ground with a clank. Clay looked towards the private of the group. "Slice into that door," she said. "On it," the private said, running to the control panel. A roaring sound of blaster fire erupted into the hallway as another masked soldier laid down a heavy barrage of laser fire with his rifle, while sprinting at the group. One round struck a member of her team in the shoulder, staggering him back. Clay drew her hand out, allowing a powerful burst of the force to escape. The force crushed the soldier's heavy armor-plated helmet like a tin can, flipping his body end over end before he too crashed onto the ground. Before Clay had an opportunity to even think of another thought, the large metallic blast door opened, giving way to a pitch-black room with dim red lights lining the walls and floor. "Well done," Clay said, clasping the private on the shoulder. I didn't do that," the private said bewilderedly, looking at the dark room. A cold feeling returned, blanketing Clay's senses and chilling her down to her very soul. "Be mindful of your senses," she said. "Focus. We need the target alive." The 4 stepped carefully into the room, sabers drawn and at the ready. The door then slammed shut behind them. Only the light of their weapons illuminated the surround. Clay motioned for her companions to stop. As they neared the center of the dome-shaped room, sitting up straight in the center of the floor, sat a black hooded and cloaked human, appearing to be in deep meditation. Clay stood in silence for a moment until a cool woman's voice echoed in her mind. "Ah, yes," the voice echoed. "I feel it. Your strength with the Force. Your feelings, they betray you. I can feel your ambition. Ah, and your plan, yes, I see that too." The woman stood up, back still facing them. She was wearing a hooded, black split dress with black light armor on her legs. "You want to capture me alive?" A dark metallic staff shot up from the floor into the woman's open hand. "You will fail," the woman screeched, tightening her grip on her staff. A short purple saber shot out of its tip, with an unmistakable low hum. She thrusted her spear-like lightsaber out and around her, and gracefully jumped further away from the trio. One of the soldiers charged at the woman, with his lightsaber at the ready. "No!" Clay shouted, but was already too late. The woman effortlessly flicked her wrist, and a bright, crackling bolt of purple lightning rushed from her fingertips and carried on the metallic floor with a blinding speed. It shot up from the floor and struck the charging soldier in his chest, sending him flying into the far wall. His limp body then crashed to the floor in a steaming heap. Clay saw a movement out of the corner of her eyes, as another soldier, holding the lightsaber, was thrusted into the air. His lightsaber clanked to the metallic floor and retreated back into its handle as he grabbed desperately for breath. Clay felt a dark pressure in the Force and nearly dodged a jab of the woman's purple lightsaber as it hummed by the side of her face. Clay grasped onto her lightsaber handle tightly and gracefully, smashed the spear-like lightsaber down and away from her body. Clay heard a crackling noise and then solid pop of the neck as a second soldier fell from the air to the ground. The private moved cautiously with her vibroblade and slashed at the dark woman, knocking her glowing purple lightsaber away with a show of brilliant sparks and light. "Ha ha 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 ha," the woman chuckled, pushing the private off into the dark distance with a mere flick of her wrist. In a brief moment, Clay got a chance to glance at the woman's paper-white pale face, which was partially covered by a black fabric mask over her mouth and nose. Her eyes were unmistakable dark blue, with glowing red and orange rings around them. The woman swung her light spear gracefully into the circle, keeping Clay at a safe distance away. The woman then rolled the spear around her arms as the purple saber countlessly struck the ground, causing sparks to fly in all directions and smoke to hiss from the floor. The private returned from the shadows with her blade at the ready, waiting for Clay's move. The woman paused and jumped back, pacing the room menacingly, while staring right at Clay, as if she could see her eyes behind her armored mask. Clay threw her arm out, sending a powerful force push towards the woman, cracked and warped the metallic floor as it soared towards her. The woman held her hand out, and a violent tremor shook the room as she stopped the force push in its tracks in front of her. The private took advantage of the distraction and lunged forward, swinging the gleaming vibroblade wildly. The woman moved her spear and body as if it were an elegant dance, easily deflecting the private's oncoming blows. Clay waved and struck, but was deflected by the handle. Shocked when it didn't break from the impact of her blade, she stepped back, slashing and intercepting the oncoming attacks. The woman stepped back again, waving her long, light spear around, making sure to keep Clay at a distance. "Ha ha ha, yes, 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 strike at me, Clay. Take hold of your ambitions. I could feel your temptation for the darkness. You want to embrace it. It calls to you. Hehehe. Don't act like you know me. You— Ah!" Clay was interrupted by a spark of lightning that the woman stealthily unleashed from her free hand. Clay sidestepped, but the woman anticipated and swung her blade, grazing Clay's face mask. Clay's vision became blurred, and the mask had become damaged. As she pressed a button on her armor and her helmet fell to the ground. "But I do know you, Clay. Oh yes, 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 I do. More than you know yourself." The woman giggled, and threw out another bolt of lightning which Clay absorbed into her lightsaber. "Do you have any idea what he will do if you accomplish your mission here? His anger will be relentless, and retaliation swift." Clay leapt over the woman with all the strength she could muster, and the two shared multiple lightsaber blows as the sabers crackled and clashed. Clay then released a small dart from a hidden opening in her armor near her wrist. The dart cut through the hood and hit the woman directly on her neck. "Oh," the hooded lady said in disbelief, clasping her neck and pulling the metal dart out. "You will not accomplish what you have." Her purple saber sheathed back into the hilt, and the staff fell to the floor with a clank. The woman fell to her knees. "He will not stop. It calls out to him." "What?" Clay asked while she force-pulled the woman's staff into her own grasp. The hooded lady hunched over, but still found the strength to look with cold amusement into Clay's eyes. "Ha," she coughed. You don't know." Her unconscious body smacked hard into the ground, leaving Clay just as shrouded in darkness as she had arrived.